So, let's talk about Socrates. You've heard the name, right? A giant of Western philosophy. But get this, the guy never wrote a single thing down, not one word. So how on earth did someone who left no text behind end up shaping the very foundation of how we think about politics, justice, and truth? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to dig into today.
For Socrates, it all boiled down to this one huge question, the one you see right here. He'd ask it to pretty much everyone he bumped into on the street. How do we really know what's good or just? In a city like Athens, just buzzing with people shouting their opinions, he saw this as, well, not just some abstract puzzle. He thought it was the most important question anyone, or any government for that matter, could ever try to answer.
You have to picture ancient Athens, right? It was a place where debating was basically a national sport. But Socrates saw a huge problem. Most people were just totally fine with their own opinions. They treated them like facts. He was the guy who stood up and said, whoa, hold on a second, let's actually examine these beliefs. And that relentless search for real truth, that's what laid the groundwork for a whole new way of thinking about politics, ethics, and knowledge itself.
Okay, so if you're going to go around challenging everyone's deepest held beliefs, how exactly do you pull that off? Not by giving big speeches or writing books, that's for sure. Socrates' main tool was just conversation. But we're not talking about idle chatter here. It was this incredibly powerful technique that we now call the Socratic method.
Right. The fancy term for his method is dialectics. But you got to forget the idea of a debate where one person wins and the other loses. That's not it at all. This is more like a team effort, a tool for using questions and answers to take apart weak ideas and, together, build a stronger understanding piece by piece.
And this slide here lays out the process perfectly. You start with a basic statement, a thesis, right? Something like, justice is just giving people what they're owed. Simple enough. But then, the questions start. Okay, but what if a madman is owed a weapon? Do you give it to him? See, these questions aren't meant to be attacks. They're designed to poke holes, to expose the flaws and contradictions in that first idea. The whole point isn't to tear someone down, but to rebuild, to get from a shaky opinion to a much more solid, defensible idea.
And yeah, this really nails the core of his whole approach. It's a journey, you know? You start out with an opinion you haven't really thought about, and through this structured conversation, you slowly chip away at all the stuff that doesn't make sense until you're left with something that feels much closer to a solid truth. It's all about intellectual humility, being willing to admit you might be wrong so you can actually learn something. Now, this constant search for truth, for Socrates, it wasn't just some fun intellectual game. He believed it was the absolute key to living a good life. And that brings us to his most radical and, honestly, influential idea in ethics, the connection between what you know and who you are. So, Socrates makes this incredibly bold claim, virtue is knowledge. He said they're one and the same. Just think about that for a second. His argument was that no one willingly chooses to do something wrong. Every single bad act, whether it's a small lie or a terrible crime, is just the result of ignorance. If you truly understood deep in your bones what the right thing to do was, you'd be literally incapable of doing the wrong thing.
This table here, it really gets to the heart of it. We all tend to think of things like wealth, or health, or even courage as just good things, right? But Socrates forces us to look closer. He'd say, what good is courage without wisdom? It's just dangerous recklessness. What about wealth without wisdom? Well, that's just a recipe for greed and corruption. For him, these things are just tools. Whether they're good or evil depends entirely on the knowledge, the wisdom, of the person using them.
Okay, so if knowledge is the key to everything, did Socrates claim to have all the answers? No way. Absolutely not. And that, maybe, is the most profound part of his whole philosophy. I mean, after all that questioning, after all those long conversations in the Athenian marketplace, Socrates never, ever stood up and said, all right, everyone, I've got it. I found the final, perfect definition of justice. For him, the process was the point. The method wasn't a failure just because it didn't end with a final answer. Its success was in the very act of searching and questioning over and over again. In this quote, it just says it all, doesn't it? For Socrates, wisdom wasn't some destination you could finally arrive at, some fact you could just grasp and be done with. No, it's the commitment to the constant search itself. It's about being a lifelong student, not some all-knowing master. And that, to him, was the real meaning of philosophy.
So what's the ultimate impact of a guy who left no writings and basically claimed to know nothing for sure? Well, as it turns out, it's immense. His legacy literally shaped the entire course of Western philosophy.
You can see that legacy crystal clear in his most famous student, Plato. You could say Socrates was the one out there carving out the foundational questions, challenging everyone to define these huge concepts like justice. Plato then took that raw material and built a whole system around it. He's the one who proposed that the knowledge Socrates was searching for actually existed in this perfect, ideal realm, a world of pure forms. It's this back and forth, this dialogue between Socrates' questioning and Plato's world-building, that's really where Western political thought kicks off.
So when you boil it all down, his legacy really comes down to these three huge contributions. First, he made critical thinking a non-negotiable part of politics. Second, he fused ethics with governance, arguing that to rule well, you have to know what is good. And finally, and maybe most importantly, he gave us the Socratic method, a timeless tool for taking apart flawed assumptions, whether you're in a courtroom, a classroom, or just examining your own beliefs in the middle of the night.
You know, Socrates' entire philosophy was basically a challenge to himself, a challenge to his city, and now a challenge to us. It's a call to relentlessly examine the ideas we just take for granted. So I'll leave you with the question on this final slide, which is a truly Socratic one. In our world today, with all its noise and opinions, what is one powerful idea, one unquestioned belief that you think really, really deserves a much deeper examination?